Ever feel like English grammar is a secret code you're just almost cracking? Like you understand a cat, but then an hour throws you for a loop, leaving you scratching your head. Or perhaps you're trying to describe something and suddenly you're thinking, is it a clean white table or a white clean table? If any of that sounds familiar, then you are absolutely not alone. Welcome to the Deep Dive, brought to you by the team behind the Real Life English podcast. I'm your guide, here to unravel some of those linguistic mysteries with you. And joining me, as always, is our brilliant language expert, ready to connect the dots and give us those satisfying aha moments.
It's great to be here. And today we're embarking on a pretty fascinating deep dive into fundamental English grammar concepts. We've pulled together a collection of insights from a source that truly promises to make basic English grammar bite-sized and transparent. Our mission really is to take these 23 foundational steps, from the smallest words like articles, all the way through to how we construct complete thoughts with proper sentence structure and distill them into actionable, crystal clear knowledge for you. Our aim isn't just to tell you what the rules are, but to explore why they exist, why they matter so much, and crucially, how applying them can dramatically improve your English journey, making your communication clearer, more precise, and frankly, more confident.
Fantastic. Let's unpack this. Our deep dive starts with the very foundation of language itself, nouns. These are the words we use to name people, places, things, even ideas. Pretty basic, right? But while the concept of a noun might seem straightforward, our source immediately highlights something surprisingly tricky for many learners, something so tiny yet so impactful. Articles. These little words a, an, and a, they sit right before our nouns and they carry a surprising amount of weight, dictating clarity.
That's a great observation. It's often overlooked just how simple yet profound the core concept is here. English only has two types of articles. We have the definite article, which is they, and then we have the indefinite articles, a and an. Despite their small size, they serve a huge purpose by telling us whether a noun is specific or general. Imagine trying to explain a specific event or a unique item without using the. You'd quickly realize how, chaotic and unclear your communication would become. That tiny word is like a linguistic GPS, instantly pinpointing exactly what you're referring to, creating a shared understanding in your listener's mind.
Okay, so let's start with the, because it really does feel like the heavy hitter. How does it work? It's magic.
Right. The definite article, the, is used when we're referring to a thing or person that has already been mentioned or that is already known to both the speaker and the listener. It's all about establishing a shared context, something specific. And what's wonderfully simple about the is that it works for both singular and plural nouns. There's no separate the for plural or singular, unlike many other languages that have different forms based on number or even gender.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is a huge simplification for English learners.
Right.
Takes away a whole layer of things to remember.
Okay. Give us an example that really illustrates that shift from general to specific. You mentioned there's a classic scenario about a dress that makes it click.
It's an excellent one. Imagine this. You're talking to a friend and you say, I saw a lovely dress in the window in town earlier today. I might go and get it. Notice you used there, because at this point, it's just one general dress among many. Your friend has no specific dress in mind yet.
Right, just some dress.
Exactly. But then, let's say you actually you buy that very specific dress you saw. When you come back to your friend, bubbling with excitement, you'd naturally announce, guess what? I bought the dress. The article completely shifted from a to the, because now that dress is no longer just any dress. It's the specific dress you just spoke about, the one you went and purchased. The listener now knows exactly which dress you're referring to. That simple change in article indicates a profound shift in shared knowledge.
That makes it so much clearer. It's like this solidifies that shared understanding. Okay. And you mentioned the dive also pops up with superlative adjectives, like the tallest, indicating something unique.
That's right, it does. We'll probably touch on that again when we talk more about adjectives, but yes, the is used with superlatives because they point to one specific item or person at the extreme end of a scale.
Got it. Okay, but for now, let's move to the indefinite articles. A and N.
So a and an are general articles. They're very much like saying one. They indicate that you're talking about any one of something, not a specific one. And this is a critical point that often catches learners out because they imply one. They're only used for singular nouns.
Only singular.
Only singular. You would never say a dog's or an apple's. It's always a dog or an apple.
Yeah.
Using them with plural nouns is a very common error that immediately signals a non-native speaker. It just sounds off.
And the big question everyone has is, When do I use a versus an? I know it has something to do with vowels,
Yeah.
but it's not just the letter, is it? It's more complicated.
Precisely. Well, not complicated, but specific. The core rule, and this is where many learners initially stumble, is that "an" is used for nouns that begin with a vowel sound. And I absolutely emphasize sound there, not just the letter itself.
A sound, okay.
So if a word starts with an A, E, I, O, U sound, you use "an." For all other consonant sounds, you use "a." For example, as we saw with our dress scenario, address, because dress starts with a D consonant sound, but an apple, because apple starts with an A vowel sound. It's all about the phonetics, how it sounds when you say it.
Ah, the sound. That's the crucial detail, and it explains why there's some classic exceptions that trip people up. For instance, we say a university, even though university starts with a U. Why is that?
This is exactly where the sound rule is absolutely vital. Words that begin with the uniprefix like university, universe, or unicorn don't actually start with a pure vowel sound when spoken. Instead, they begin with a way sound specifically, the Jew sound you hear at the beginning of the word you.
Like university.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a yay consonant sound, not a pure vowel sound, we use a. So it's always a university, never a university. And this also applies to other U words that sound like yai, such as a U.S. Army base, or even words where an O sounds like a yay, like a one-man band.
One-man band.
Right. Starts with a W sound,
Right.
A. These are the primary exceptions to keep in mind. And once you grasp the sound rule, they become much clearer and less like arbitrary exceptions you just have to memorize.
So it's really about training your ear, not just your eye looking at the spelling. I remember when I first learned this, it felt like a revelation. It simplifies things so much. And it's worth reiterating, as our source points out, that English articles don't have gender or specific plural forms, which is a huge relief for learners coming from languages that do.
It truly is, yeah.
It removes a whole layer of complexity for them.
It really does. That simplification is one of the hidden gems in English grammar. Once you've mastered the definite and indefinite distinction and the vowel consonant sound rule, you're already well on your way to using articles correctly and sounding much more natural.
Now let's move from these tiny words to something that instantly elevates your writing and shows attention to detail. Capitalization. It seems simple, but getting it right matters. It's all about knowing when to capitalize proper nouns versus common nouns.
That's right. The rule is quite clear and consistent. Proper nouns always need to be capitalized, regardless of where they appear in a sentence. Proper nouns are the specific, unique names of people, places, or things. Think of cities like London, countries like Brazil, specific people's names like Maria.
Or James or Michaela, though we don't use names here.
Right. Or particular restaurants like the Hungry Bear, days of the week like Tuesday, months of the year like August, or the names of businesses like Global Enterprises. For instance, you'd always write Eiffel Tower with both words capitalized, not Eiffel Tower. It designates that unique, famous structure, setting it apart from any other tower.
And then on the flip side, we have common nouns. These are the general ones.
Exactly. Common nouns are the generic names for a general person, place, or thing. A table, for instance, is a common noun. These are only capitalized if they happen to be at the very beginning of a sentence. That's the only time. So you'd write, I sat at the table, with a small t, not I sat at the table. The only reason table would be capitalized is if it started the sentence like, table manners are important in formal dining. Then the T is capital because it's the first word.
And there is a specific extra note about capitalization that's particularly helpful, especially for learners from countries where this rule is different. Something about seasons.
Yes, this is a very common point of confusion for learners from some other linguistic backgrounds, like German, where all nouns are capitalized. English does not capitalize seasons.
Right, so summer, winter.
Exactly. You write summer, winter, autumn, and spring with a small s or w or a or sp, unless, of course, they begin a sentence. For example, I love the warm weather in summer, not in summer. This is a quick and easy way to make your writing look instantly more natural and grammatically correct, a small thing, but noticeable.
That's a great tip for instantly making your writing look more natural. Okay, now stepping into the world of pronouns. These are incredibly useful for avoiding repetition, making our language more concise and fluid. Our source breaks down 3 key types that are foundational to understanding how sentences work.
Indeed. Pronouns are essentially substitutes for nouns, preventing our sentences from becoming clunky with repeated names or phrases. Imagine repeatedly saying, John went to the shop, John bought milk, John came home. It's clunky, right?
Very robotic.
Yeah. Replace John with he, and it flows smoothly. John went to the shop, he bought milk, he came home. Much better. The source highlights personal, object, and possessive pronouns, and understanding their distinct function is key.
So we have a clear table here showing the relationship between them. I corresponding to me and mine, you to you and yours, he to him and his, she to her and hers, it to it, with a note that it exists as a possessive adjective, which we'll get to we to us and ours, and they to them and theirs.
That table clearly lays out the forms. To understand their function, think of it this way. Personal pronouns like I, you, he, she, it, we, and they act as the subject of a sentence. They are the ones performing the action.
The doer.
The doer. For example, she ran quickly. She is the subject. Object pronouns me, you, him, her, it, us, and them receive the action, functioning as the object of the sentence.
The receiver.
The receiver. So the dog followed him. Him is the object. And then possessive pronouns mine, yours, his, hers, ours, and theirs clearly indicate possession without needing to mention the noun again. That book is mine. It stands alone. The source wisely suggests looking at the sentence structures section for more on how these fit into the larger picture, which we'll definitely explore later.
Right. Okay, beyond just standing in for names, some pronouns actively point things out. Think of them as your linguistic pointers. These are demonstrative pronouns.
Exactly. This, these, that, and those are incredibly useful for directing attention, for literally pointing to something or someone in discourse. We use this for singular items and these for plural items when they're close to us, either physically or maybe conceptually.
Close by.
Close by, yeah. For example, you might say, this is an excellent plate of pasta if it's right in front of you. Or, these shoes are beautiful if you're holding them or they're on your feet. They also serve a common social function to introduce people, like, this is my mom, Eva, or these are my cousins, Rick and Rosie. It's an efficient way to make immediate introductions.
And then for things that are a bit further away or conceptually more distant.
For things or people that are not immediately near us or are more distant in concept, we use that for singular and those for plural. So, that car over there is lovely, pointing to a car across the street. Or, those are lovely trousers, referring to something in a shop window, maybe. Interestingly, that can also be used as a versatile response in conversation. Like if someone asks, shall we go shopping? You can reply, yes, that's a great idea. That refers back to the whole idea of going shopping. These pronouns help us efficiently manage spatial and conceptual distance in our communication. Very useful.
Hopefully this deep dive has been useful so far. See what I did there? I used a demonstrative pronoun.
Huh. Very good.
Okay, next up, a really important category for learners because it behaves quite differently in English compared to many other languages. Uncountable nouns.
This is a huge one for learners, yeah.
Yeah.
As many languages treat these nouns as countable, or at least differently. Uncountable nouns are exactly what they sound like. Nouns that we cannot count with numbers, and crucially, they do not pluralize by adding an S at the end.
No S.
No S. This is in stark contrast to countable nouns where you could say a dog or two dogs, which makes perfect sense. The conceptual difference here is that uncountable nouns refer to a mass or a general category, not individual, separate items. Think of water or sand or information.
Right. So with information, for example, you can't say an information or two informations. That just sounds completely wrong to a native speaker.
Exactly. Information is a classic example of an uncountable noun. The source lists many others that are commonly tricky for learners. Evidence, rice, knowledge, advice, sugar, money, accommodation, news, travel, bread, luggage, and furniture.
Ah, furniture, that's a common one.
It is. None of these nouns should have an S added to them to pluralize them, nor should you put a number directly before them, like two furnitures. That is grammatically incorrect because you can't break them down into discrete countable units.
So if you can't count them with numbers, how do you quantify them? How do you say some of it or talk about amounts?
That's where quantifiers come in handy, or specific units of measurement. You use words like much, a lot of, some, or a bit of to describe an unspecified amount. For instance, I don't have much information, or could I have some sugar, or I need a bit of advice. Or, if you need to be precise, you use exact measurements that quantify the container or the unit, not the noun itself. So, 2 pieces of information, 1 teaspoon of sugar, or 3 cups of rice. You're essentially counting the wrapper or the portion around the uncountable noun.
Like a loaf of bread or 2 slices of bread?
Precisely. And we wouldn't say many information, but rather much information. That much versus many distinction is a common pitfall. Many for countable nouns, many dogs. Much for uncountable nouns, much information.
And there's a fascinating extra note about hair, which I think really helps solidify the concept of uncountable versus countable. It seems to break its own rule.
It's a great example of English nuance. Generally, hair is uncountable in English. We use the word hair as a collective noun for all the hair on your head or body, even if there are many individual strands. So she has long, beautiful hair. You wouldn't say she has many hairs if you're talking about the general mass on her head. However, the exception is when you are talking about specific individual strands of hair that you can literally count. In that rare case, hair does become countable, and you can say hairs. For example, I found 3 gray hairs on my pillow this morning. Here, you're counting distinct individual strands. It's about distinguishing between the mass and the individual units.
Fascinating. Okay, finally, in our noun section, we have the connectors relative pronouns. These are crucial for building more complex and descriptive sentences, allowing us to add detail without starting new sentences all the time.
Relative pronouns are indeed the workhorses of complex sentences because they initiate relative clauses. These clauses provide additional information about a noun that's already been mentioned. The fundamental 7 are who, whom, which, whose, where, when, and that. The key distinction here, which is vital for both clarity and correct punctuation, is between defining and non-defining relative clauses.
Let's start with defining relative clauses. What makes them defining? What does that mean?
Defining relative clauses provide information that is absolutely essential to the meaning of the sentence. If you remove them, the sentence's meaning changes, becomes unclear, or even incorrect.
So you can't leave them out.
You cannot leave them out, no. They define which specific noun you're talking about. For instance, the person who stopped me in the street was Vicky, my manager. If you remove who stopped me in the street, you just have the person was Vicky, my manager, which loses the crucial identifying information of which person you're referring to. Maybe there were several people nearby.
Okay, makes sense.
Another example is, the place where we get our vegetables from has closed down. If you remove the relative clause, you don't know which specific place has closed down. All relative pronouns can be used in defining relative clauses. And a quick note on whom here. While less common in everyday spoken English, whom is the object form of who. So who is for the subject, the one doing the action, and whom is for the object, the one receiving the action. For example, the man whom I saw yesterday was my old teacher. It's still grammatically correct and appears in more formal writing, but often people just use who or even omit the pronoun in defining clauses.
Right. And non-defining relative clauses are different because you can leave them out, so they're like optional extras, just adding more info.
Precisely. Non-defining relative clauses provide extra, non-essential information. The sentence would still make perfect sense without them. They'd just add a bit more detail or color. For example, Sarah, whose sister lives in Ethiopia, is well-traveled. The core sentence, Sarah is well-traveled, is complete and makes sense. The clause, whose sister lives in Ethiopia, just adds an interesting but non-essential detail about Sarah. Similarly, there is a castle, which is used for weddings from the Elizabethan era. The main point, there's a castle from the Elizabethan era, stands on its own. The wedding part is just extra info.
So they're truly like helpful asides. And our source has 2 really important ground rules for non-defining clauses that often get forgotten, leading to common grammatical errors, particularly with punctuation.
Absolutely. Rule number 1 is that we must use commas to separate non-defining relative clauses from the main clause. These commas act as visual signals to the reader, indicating that the information within the clause is additional, not essential, like parentheses almost.
Okay, commas are key.
Commas are key. And rule number 2, which is a common mistake for learners, is that the relative pronoun that cannot be used in non-defining clauses.
Only which or who, etc.
Exactly. You would not say the castle that is used for weddings. You would specifically use which instead. The castle, which is used for weddings. Or for people, Sarah, who lives next door. Not Sarah, that lives next door. Understanding this distinction instantly makes your writing more precise and polished and avoids a very common error.
So we've laid the groundwork, understanding the fundamental building blocks of language nouns, those essential naming words, along with their articles and various types of pronouns. We've seen how tiny words can carry immense meaning and how precise choices make communication clearer. Now that we understand what things are, let's explore what they do, and maybe more importantly, when they do it. This means it's time to talk about the dynamic world of verbs.
It's true. Verbs are the dynamic core of sentences. They're the action words, and tenses tell us when that action happens. This is where English can feel quite complex, let's be honest. But our source provides a fantastic roadmap by outlining the 3 basic tenses you should know: the present tense, the past tense, and the future tense. What's crucial to grasp, though, is that within each of these basic tenses there are 4 subsections or aspects: the simple tense, the continuous or progressive tense, the perfect simple tense, and the perfect continuous tense.
So we have this 3x4 grid, essentially, giving us 12 potential verb tense combinations. Wow. Now, while our deep dive won't cover all 12 of those combinations today in exhaustive detail, that's a whole separate deep dive in itself, just understanding that conceptual framework, that categorization, is a massive first step. It helps you see the method behind the madness, right? Rather than just a jumble of individual tenses. Can you briefly explain the purpose of each of those 4 subsections? Like, what do they do?
Absolutely. Think of it this way, kind of simplifying it. The simple tenses, like I walk, I walked, I will walk, are generally used for facts, habits, completed actions in the past, or future events that are certain. They're about direct, straightforward information, like a snapshot.
Okay. Simple facts.
Right. Then the continuous tenses, like I am walking, I was walking, I will be walking, describe actions that are ongoing or in progress at a specific time. They emphasize the duration or the process of the action, like a video clip.
Ongoing action.
Then we have the perfect simple tenses, like I have walked, I had walked, I will have walked. These connect one time to another, usually indicating an action completed before a certain point or an action with a result relevant to the present or another point in time. Think completion or connection.
Connection between times, okay.
And finally, the perfect continuous tenses, like I have been walking, I had been walking, I will have been walking, combine both ideas. An action that started in the past and continued up to a specific point, often emphasizing the duration leading up to that point.
Duration and connection. Wow. Okay.
Understanding these core concepts for each section or aspect makes approaching any specific tense much less intimidating. And speaking of systems, one of the most fundamental and often tricky aspects of verbs in the present tense relates to the third person singular, that little s.
Yes. This is a prime example of where a small detail can make a huge difference, especially when talking about he, she, or it. It's that little s at the end of the verb that seems to pop up out of nowhere for learners.
Yes, the s for he, she, or it in the present simple tense is a cornerstone of subject-verb agreement. The core rule is straightforward. When your subject is a singular third-person pronoun, he, she, it, or a singular noun it refers to, like the dog, Maria, the car, you add an s to the end of the base form of the verb. So, it smell is incorrect, it smells, he walk is wrong, he walks.
But then there are those verbs that require an e, which can be confusing. It's not always just is.
Right, good point. If the base verb ends in certain sounds specifically, sounds like s, z, esh, or case, x, or the vowel o, you add e's instead of just eats. This often helps with pronunciation, adding an extra syllable. A classic example is do. For Pietro, who is he, you don't say Pietro does gymnastics every day. It's Pietro does gymnastics every day.
Okay.
Does, or watch, which becomes watches, or fix, which becomes fixes. Kiss becomes kisses. Go becomes goes.
And what about words ending in y, like worry or study? How does the says rule work there?
Another spelling twist. If the base form of the verb ends in a consonant followed by y, you remove the y and add i's. So Dolly worries about her dog is incorrect. It should be Dolly worries about her dog.
Change y to i's.
Exactly. This applies to verbs like study, studies, try, tries, carry, and so on. It's a spelling rule as much as a grammar rule, ensuring consistency in how the words sound and look. But if it ends in a vowel plus y, like play, you just add s, plays.
And of course, we have these super common irregular verbs, be and have, that seem to march to their own drum, completely ignoring these rules.
They absolutely do, and they are fundamental. These are forms you simply must commit to memory because they are so frequent. For be, in the present simple, it transforms into is when used with he, she, or it. So he is here, not he bez or he be.
Right, is.
And transforms into has for he, she, or it. For example, she has a motorbike, not she has.
Has. Okay.
These might seem like small changes, but mastering them instantly improves your fluency and accuracy. These are really common areas for errors, and getting them right makes a noticeable difference in how natural your English sounds to a native ear.
Speaking of sounding natural, here's something often overlooked but so important: pronunciation. While regular verbs in the past tense end in ed, that ed doesn't always sound the same, does it?
This is a fantastic point, and one that truly differentiates a learner from someone who sounds more natural. It's subtle but significant. When regular verbs are in the past simple tense, they end in "ade," and this also applies to their past participle form, used for perfect simple tenses and passive voice. However, that "ade" ending has three distinct pronunciations. Aid, like aid, T, and D. It's all about what sound precedes the aid.
Okay, 3 sounds. Can you give us a few examples for each? It's so much easier to hear them than to just read the rule.
Absolutely. Let's break it down. The aid sound occurs when the base verb ends in a T or D sound. This creates an extra syllable. Think wanted, demanded, started, decided, or needed. You hear that clear extra syllable.
Wanted, needed, got it.
Then we have the T sound. This happens when the verb ends in an unvoiced consonant sound. That means a sound made without using your vocal cords, like K, P, F, S, S, C, Sh. Examples are asked, danced, stopped, jumped, and learnt. Notice there's no extra syllable. The ed just sounds like a quick T. Asked, stopped.
Right, just a sharp T. Okay.
Finally, the D sound is used for verbs ending in a voiced consonant sound or a vowel sound. These are sounds made using your vocal cords, like R, L, N, V, Z, B, G, M, or any vowel sound. These include words like carried, traveled, played, enjoyed, and stayed. Again, no extra syllable, just a clear D sound. Carried, played.
Played, okay.
Listening for these sounds and practicing them makes a huge difference in your spoken English, making it flow much more smoothly. It's a key part of pronunciation.
Now, irregular verbs. This is where English really throws a curveball, isn't it? They don't follow the nice, neat ed rule for the past tense, and they often change completely. Go is a perfect example of this unpredictability.
Go is indeed a classic irregular verb, and it stands out because it has two past participles, gone and been. This is a major point of confusion for learners, but understanding the distinction is absolutely crucial for proper usage in perfect tenses. In the present simple, it's go, easy. In the past simple, it's went, completely different word.
Went.
But then for the past participle, used in perfect tenses, like the present perfect shave gone or shave been, you have to choose between gone and been, and they mean different things.
And this is where the train ticket analogy comes in, which is just brilliant for remembering the difference. I love this one.
It truly is a lifesaver for remembering this particular rule. Think of gone as a one-way journey. We use gone when someone or something has left their original position and has not yet returned. They are still away.
Still away. Okay.
For instance, Filippo has gone to the supermarket. This means Filippo is still at the supermarket or on his way there. He's not back home yet. He embarked on a one-way trip for now. He's still away.
So he's still there?
Yeah.
And then been is the return journey. He went and he's back. Or he's been there at some point in the past.
Exactly. The been is used when someone or something left their original position and then returned. It implies a completed trip. So if you say, Filippo has been to the supermarket, it means he went to the supermarket, completed his trip, and is now back home, or at least back at the starting point. He made a return journey.
Okay.
This analogy makes the distinction very clear. Gone is for one-way trips, still away, and been is for return trips, went and came back. Another common example. I've been to Paris many times. It means I went and came back each time. But he's gone to Paris for a business trip. It means he's currently in Paris.
That's super helpful. Okay, the verb be is also another verb that changes a lot in English, perhaps more than any other. It's arguably the most versatile and important verb in English, constantly changing its form depending on the subject and tense.
It really is a chameleon of a verb, changing to fit its grammatical surroundings. In the present simple and present continuous forms, be shifts dramatically depending on the subject. For I, it's am, as in I am 30 years old. For they, we, and you, it becomes are, so we are friends. And for he, she, and it transforms into is, like she is nice. These three forms, am or is, are crucial for basic communication.
And it changes again in the past continuous, doesn't it?
That's right. In the past continuous, be becomes was for I, he, she, and it. So he was running in the park when it started to rain. And for they, we, and you, it becomes were, as in we were watching a film last night. The consistent part across all subjects for the past participle, used in perfect tenses and the passive voice, is been. For example, I have been doing my homework for 3 hours, or the work has been finished.
And it's crucial here not to confuse been as the past participle of to be with been as the past participle of to go. We just talked about that gone versus been distinction where been meant a return trip. It's the same word been, but its function here is different when it's part of the verb to be, right?
A very important clarification.
Yes.
While the form been is identical, its grammatical role and the overall meaning it conveys depend entirely on context and the main verb it's helping. When it's part of to go, for ye have been to Paris's, it talks about travel and return. When it's part of to be, for ye have been busy, have been waiting, it talks about a state or an ongoing action leading up to the present. Always look at the surrounding words to understand its function.
Okay, now this is a rule that often catches learners off guard, but once you know it, it's a huge step forward in natural English. State verbs, or what's sometimes called the no ing rule. It's all about whether a verb describes a state or an action.
This is a classic source of error for English learners because it directly contrasts with how many other languages function. State verbs, also known as state verbs, describe states of being rather than physical actions. They express things like thoughts, know, believe, perceptions, see, hear, emotions, love, hate, possession, have, own, and senses, smell, taste. Things that are generally static or continuous conditions, not dynamic actions that begin and end easily. The crucial catch is that they cannot typically be used in the continuous form. They're almost exclusively used in simple tenses.
So words like believe, doubt, guess, understand, possess, belong, recognize, mean, or appear, I can't say I am believing her, right? Even if I'm actively believing in that moment.
Exactly. I am understanding her is a common mistake that sounds unnatural to a native speaker because understand describes a state of knowledge, not an action you are currently performing in that moment. The correct way to say that is simply, I understand her. When you encounter a stative verb being used incorrectly in a continuous form, you need to remove both the ing at the end of the verb and the auxiliary verb that precedes it, like am or is or are.
Okay, get rid of both.
Both. Think about it. Can you be doing a belief? No, you either believe it or you don't. These aren't actions that start and stop. They're continuous states of being or perception, which is why adding an ing feels so fundamentally wrong to a native speaker. It's trying to make a static concept into a dynamic one. Another example. You wouldn't say, I'm knowing the answer, but I know the answer. Or, she is liking ice cream, but she likes ice cream.
That distinction between a state and an action really clarifies it. Okay, next up, let's talk about those words that stand by our main verbs and offer support. Think of these as the loyal assistants to our main verbs, essential for forming questions, negatives, and certain tenses or affirmations. These are auxiliary verbs, also known as helping verbs.
That's a perfect way to put it. Auxiliary verbs don't stand alone as the main action. They help the main verb to convey complex meanings related to tense, voice, or mood. The primary auxiliary verbs are be, do, and have. We've already seen them in action. For example, in they were laughing, where a form of be is helping the main verb laughing to form the past continuous tense, or we didn't go to Alaska, did, a form of do, is helping go to form the negative past simple, and it has started to rain, where has, a form of have, helps started form the present perfect tense, showing an action completed with present relevance.
And then we have another very important category of helpers, modal auxiliaries. These add a whole new layer of meaning, like possibility or obligation.
Yes, modal auxiliary verbs add nuances like possibility, might, may, could, necessity, must, permission, can, may, ability, can, advice, should, or polite requests, would, could. These include shall, should, could, would, must, might, may, will, and can. They function similarly to the main auxiliaries, aiding the main verb to express these different shades of meaning. For example, I would like to see you expresses a polite desire. Can you help me with the shopping? Asks for ability or permission. Or he should say something to Bianca indicates advice or obligation.
And there's a really important rule here, a very common mistake, especially with modal verbs. Something about the main verb never changing form after a modal.
Yes, this is a critical point that trips up many learners. The main verb that comes immediately after a modal verb always stays in its base form, the infinitive without to. It never has an S on the end, even if the subject is the third person singular, he, she, it.
Never an S. Okay.
Never an S. The modal verb itself already carries the grammatical information regarding the subject and tense, or lack thereof. So, you would not say he should say something to Bianca. That is a common and noticeable error. The correct form is always, he should say something to Bianca.
Should say.
Similarly, it's she can swim, not she can swim, or he must leave, not he must leave. The main verb remains in its simplest base form.
Okay, voices. English has two voices. And understanding the difference is all about changing what you want to emphasize in a sentence. We're talking about the active and passive voice.
Exactly. We have the active voice and the passive voice. The active voice is generally more direct and emphasizes the subject who or what is performing the action. For example, Will eat the sandwich. Here, the emphasis is clearly on Will, the subject, doing the eating. He's the agent. It's straightforward. In contrast, the passive voice shifts the emphasis to the object, the thing or person receiving the action. The doer of the action, the agent, becomes less important, may be unknown, or is often completely omitted.
And what's the structure for forming the passive voice? It sounds a bit like a formula we need to follow.
It is a clear formula, which makes it easier to construct once you know it. The structure is always the correct form of the verb to be. In the appropriate tense is, was, were, has been, will be, etc., plus the past participle of the main verb.
Okay, be plus past participle.
Right. Remember, the past participle is that third form of the verb, like eaten for eat, or driven for drive, or simply the ed form for regular verbs like played, cooked. So, taking our example, Will ate the sandwich. If we want to emphasize the sandwich, we transform it into the passive. The sandwich was eaten by Will. Here, was eaten is verb to be, was past tense to match ate, plus past participle, eaten. The focus moves to the sandwich, which was the object in the active sentence. And Will, the original subject, becomes secondary and is often introduced with by or even omitted if unimportant or unknown. For instance, the window was broken. We don't know who broke it, or it doesn't matter. The passive voice is frequently used in scientific writing. The experiment was conducted when the process or result is more important than the researcher, or in news reports, several people were injured, when the actor is unknown or less relevant than the event itself.
Okay, that makes sense. Finally, ing words. They can be so confusing because they pop up everywhere and seem to do different jobs. Our source clarifies the dual life of ing words, distinguishing between gerunds and present participles.
This is a classic point of confusion, definitely, and the source does an excellent job of untangling it. Both gerunds and present participles end in ing, which is why they are often mistaken for the same thing. But their grammatical function within a sentence is entirely different, and understanding that function is the key.
So what's a gerund? What role does it play? How does it function?
A gerund functions as a noun. It acts as the subject, object, or complement of a sentence, basically naming an activity or concept. For instance, in the sentence, cooking is my hobby, the word cooking is the subject of the sentence. It's the thing that is your hobby. Therefore, it's a gerund, acting just like a noun. It names the activity.
Like tennis is my hobby. Cooking works the same way.
Exactly the same grammatical slot. Similarly, swimming is the best form of exercise here. Swimming is the noun, the subject. Or, I love reading. Here, reading is the direct object of the verb love. Go love, reading. It's functioning as a noun.
And then the present participle, also ending in ing, is used as a verb or an adjective. How do we tell the difference there?
Correct. When an ing word is used as a verb, it's a present participle, typically as part of a continuous tense with an auxiliary be verb. For example, I am cooking dinner. Here, cooking is clearly describing the action you are performing right now, so it's part of the verb phrase am cooking. In he was swimming twice a day, swimming is describing his action in the past. It's the verb. When used as an adjective, the ing word, still technically a participle, describes a noun, often telling us what characteristic it has or what effect it causes. For example, it was a boring film. The film itself caused the boredom, so boring describes the film, acting as an adjective before the noun.
Or the running water.
Exactly. Running describes the water. The key is to look at how the word is functioning within the sentence. Is it naming something, noun gerund, or describing an action, verb present participle, or describing a quality of a noun, adjective present participle?
Wow, what an exploration of verbs. We've navigated the intricate world of tenses, untangled, tricky, irregular verbs like go and be, clarified the roles of stative and auxiliary verbs, and even understood the power of the passive voice and the dual nature of ing words. Phew! We've moved from understanding what things are to what they do and when. Now that we've built our sentences with nouns and verbs, let's add some flair and precision. Adjectives and adverbs are all about describing, but they have their own specific rules, and often an unspoken hierarchy. We'll start with something truly fascinating: adjective word order.
This is one of those rules even native speakers follow instinctively without really knowing why, which makes it a powerful insight for learners. The general rule in English is straightforward enough. Adjectives almost always come before the noun they describe.
Before the noun. Okay.
You say red wine, not wine red, unlike many other languages, so that's a common point of adjustment for learners. Simple enough.
But then, when you have multiple adjectives describing a single noun, there's a specific unspoken order. It's almost like a secret code that native speakers just know. It's not really taught explicitly, but it's absolutely consistent, isn't it?
It is. And while it might seem overwhelming at first to memorize, it truly becomes intuitive once you recognize the pattern. It just sounds right one way and wrong the other way. The general order for descriptive adjectives is usually something like this: opinion, size, age, shape, color, origin, material, purpose. It's often remembered by mnemonics like OSASCOMP, or slightly different versions exist, but the core idea is opinion first, then physical description, then classification.
Okay, OSASCOMP. So let's go back to our intro example. Is it a white, clean table or a clean, white table? According to this order, clean is an opinion or maybe quality, and white is a color. So what's the correct order and why?
Applying the rule, opinion comes before physical attributes like color. So it's a clean white table.
Clean, white table. Okay.
That's the natural order because our brains sort of instinctively process subjective opinions before concrete physical attributes like color. If you said white, clean table, it would sound slightly off, a bit clunky to a native speaker. The source gives another great example. Brown, young horse sounds incorrect because young age should come before brown color. Age comes before color in the OSASCOMP order.
Right.
So it should be a young brown horse.
Yeah.
You don't often need to use all 8 categories in one go. Usually 2 or 3 descriptive adjectives are enough. But knowing this order makes your description sound incredibly natural and fluent. It's something that instantly elevates your spoken and written English.
So if I'm trying to tell my friend about my new fantastic large antique wooden dining table, wow, that's a lot. I'd say my fantastic large size antique age wooden material dining purpose.
Fantastic large antique wooden dining table. Perfect order. You nailed it. And that really clarifies things. It just clicks when you put it that way.
Okay. Now let's move on to comparisons, which are essential for describing differences and similarities between things.
Comparisons are indeed essential, yes. And while many adjectives follow predictable patterns for comparatives, comparing 2 things, and superlatives, comparing 3 or more, some are delightfully rebellious. We're talking about irregular comparatives and superlatives.
Right. We know that comparatives are used to compare 2 nouns, typically by adding to a short adjective, like smaller, or using more or less plus than for longer ones, more beautiful than. For example, Paris is smaller than Rome. And superlatives are used to describe 3 or more nouns, indicating which is the most supreme in some quality, usually by adding est, smallest, or most least, the most beautiful, with the before it. Frank is the tallest sibling.
Precisely. That's their pattern. But then we have the irregular ones that don't play by those rules. Their forms change completely, and you simply need to commit them to memory because they're very common. The source highlights 3 key irregular sets. First, good, which becomes better in the comparative and best in the superlative. You don't say gooder or goodest.
Right. Better, best.
For example, this cake is good, but that one is better, and this is the best cake I've ever tasted. Then bad, which transforms into worse and worst, not badder or baddest.
Worse.
So this weather is bad, but yesterday's was worse, and this is the worst day of my life. And finally, far, which has 2 options. Further or farther for comparative, and furthest or farthest for superlative.
Further and farther, is there a difference?
It's subtle, and many native speakers use them interchangeably now, especially for physical distance. Technically, farther relates more strictly to physical distance, he lives farther away, while further can also imply a more abstract or metaphorical distance, like let's discuss this further, or we need further information. But honestly, for distance, both are generally accepted. These irregular forms might seem like exceptions, but they are incredibly common words, so knowing them is essential.
Okay, good to know. Now, we talked about personal and possessive pronouns earlier. Mine, yours, his. But there's another important part to the ownership puzzle. Possessive adjectives. My, your, his. How do they fit in? They sound similar.
That's right. Both possessive pronouns and possessive adjectives express possession, but their placement and grammatical role in a sentence are different. It's a very common point of confusion. Let's look at them side by side. Possessive pronouns. Mine, yours, his, hers, ours, theirs. Note, it doesn't have a possessive pronoun form like it's exclusively a possessive adjective. These stand alone.
Standalone, okay.
Possessive adjectives. My, your, his, her, its, our, their. These need a noun after them.
Need a noun. Got it. So what's the key distinction in how they're actually used in a sentence?
The main difference is that possessive pronouns replace a noun or noun phrase to avoid repetition. They stand in for possessive adjective plus noun. For example, instead of saying, Vera's lilies are nicer than my lilies, you say Vera's lilies are nicer than mine. Here, mine replaces my lilies and stands alone at the end.
Okay, mine means my lilies.
Exactly. Possessive adjectives, on the other hand, are always placed before the noun they modify. They act like regular adjectives describing the noun. So, my lilies are not as nice as Vera's. Here, my lily describes lilies coming right before it. You need the noun lilies there.
And when you're using names instead of pronouns to show ownership, like Vera's lilies?
If you're using a person's name to show possession, you typically add an apostrophe "es," like Vera's lilies, or John's car. If a name already ends in D's, like James, you have a couple of options stylistically. You can just add an apostrophe James's, or you can add another apostrophe S, James's. Both James' car and James's car are considered correct in modern English usage, though some style guides might prefer one over the other. Consistency is key.
It's also possible to use both a possessive adjective and a possessive pronoun in the same sentence when comparing two things. Right. That seems efficient.
Exactly. To build on the earlier example, you can perfectly well say, your lilies are nicer than mine. Here, your is the possessive adjective modifying lilies, coming before the noun. And mine is the possessive pronoun replacing my lilies, standing alone at the end. Makes the comparison efficient and clear.
And now for some critical extra notes that address extremely common mistakes, even for native speakers sometimes, often related to sound-alike words. These are huge pitfalls, especially in writing.
You're right. These are absolutely enormous areas for errors that persist even with advanced learners, and sometimes, yet, even native speakers get them wrong in writing. First, never ever confuse it's, the possessive adjective form showing ownership, with its, which is a contraction for it is, or sometimes it has.
They sound identical.
They sound identical but have completely different meanings and grammatical functions. So, the dog wagged its tail is possessive, the tail belonging to the dog. No apostrophe. While it's going to rain means it is going to rain. The apostrophe in it always signals a contraction, a missing letter. If you can replace it with it is or it has, use the apostrophe. If not, don't. The same exact warning, perhaps even more critical because there are three of them, applies to there, and there. This is a trio of homophones that cause immense confusion in writing.
Oh, yeah, the classic.
The classic. Let's break it down. There, T-H-E-I-R, is the possessive adjective. Their house is big. It indicates ownership by they, belonging to them.
Okay, possessive.
There, T-H-E-R-E, usually indicates a place. The book is over there. It also functions as an introductory word in sentences like, there is a solution, location, or existence.
Place or start of sentence.
And their T-H-E-Y apostrophe R-E is always a contraction for they are. They're going to the party. Check if you can replace it with they are.
They are. Got it.
Mastering these distinctions, especially in writing, instantly elevates your English, making it clearer and more professional. It shows attention to detail that many others miss.
Definitely worth focusing on those. Okay, next up, ing versus ed adjectives. This is another area where a small ending changes everything about the meaning. Think about interesting versus interested, or exciting versus excited.
This is a classic point of confusion, because both ing and ed can form adjectives from verbs, but they convey completely different meanings, usually related to cause and effect, especially with emotions or reactions. An adjective ending in ing generally describes the source or cause of a feeling or reaction. It describes something external that causes an emotion in someone else. It's the characteristic of the thing itself.
The cause. Okay.
For example, the news about the holiday was exciting. The news itself possessed the quality of being exciting. It caused the excitement in the listener. Similarly, the professor's speech was interesting. The speech itself was the source of interest. The film was boring.
And then the ed adjective is about how someone or something feels as a result of that external cause. It describes the internal feeling or state.
Exactly. The ed adjective describes the feeling experienced by a person, or sometimes an animal. So, I am excited about the holiday. Here, excited describes your feeling, your internal state, caused by the exciting news, or he is interested in what the professor has to say. His feeling is one of interest, caused by the interesting speech. I was bored during the film. It's the crucial difference between something being the source, exciting, interesting, boring, AGG, and someone feeling the result, excited, interested, bored, AD. If you remember cuss versus feeling,
Yeah.
you'll get it right every time.
Cause versus feeling. That's a great way to remember it. Okay, just a quick revisit here, because it's so fundamental to sounding natural. Where should you put adjectives? We talked about adjective order earlier, but just the basic placement. It bears repeating with a quick clarification on the main exception.
It definitely bears repeating because it's a common point of difference from many other languages and foundational to basic sentence structure. In English, the adjective usually comes before the noun it describes. So you would say red wine, not wine red. This is the standard descriptive placement when the adjective is directly modifying the noun within a noun phrase. For example, she bought a beautiful dress. Beautiful comes before dress. He has a fast car.
But there is an important exception, right? When the adjective comes after the noun.
Yes, the primary exception is when you use the verb to be or other similar linking verbs like seem, appear, feel, become between the noun or pronoun subject and the adjective. In this structure, the adjective comes after the verb to be. For example, the wine is red. Here, red is describing the wine, but it follows the verb is.
The wine is red. Okay.
We use this form where we're giving information about the noun, often making a statement of fact or quality about the subject, rather than just using it descriptively within a phrase. The dress is beautiful. He seems tired. It's more predicative, stating something about the subject.
Got it. Before the noun, usually, but after be or similar verbs. Okay, now let's distinguish between adjectives and adverbs. This is where we clarify whether we're describing nouns or describing verbs or other things. The clue is often in the word itself, or at least the ending, right? Is it an adjective or an adverb?
This distinction is absolutely fundamental to precise communication. Adjectives, as we've discussed, are used to describe nouns or pronouns. They tell us more about people, places, things, or ideas, answering questions like what kind, which one, how many. Adverbs, on the other hand, are used to describe or modify verbs, telling us how, when, where, why an action is performed. Or they can also modify other adverbs, he ran very quickly, or even adjectives, she is extremely happy.
So they modify almost anything except nouns.
Pretty much. The word adverb itself gives a hint. Think of add as add. You're adding descriptive detail to the verb primarily, or to adjectives or other adverbs.
And a big help for identifying adverbs is that many of them end in "-ly", like slowly, quickly, nicely, beautifully.
That adjoy ending is a very common and helpful clue, signaling that a word is likely an adverb formed from an adjective. Slow, slowly, quickly, beautiful, beautifully. For example, he walked slowly tells us how he walked, modifies the verb walked. She sang beautifully. However, not all words ending in adjli are adverbs. E.g., friendly is an adjective, and crucially, not all adverbs end in adjli. There are some words that can function as both an adjective and an adverb, and they don't change their form at all. These are important to recognize, as they can cause significant confusion.
Like late or fast or hard, they don't add an adverb when they become adverbs.
Exactly. These are common flat adverbs. For late, you can say, I got the late train here. Late is an adjective describing the noun train, but you can also say, the train arrived late here. Late is an adverb describing how or when the train arrived, modifying the verb arrived.
Same word, different job.
Same word, different job. The same applies to fast and hard. She runs fast. Fast is an adverb describing the verb runs, how she runs, but she is fast. Fast is an adjective describing she, what kind of runner she is, or they work hard. Hard is an adverb describing work, how they work, versus this bed is hard. Hard is an adjective describing the noun bed, what kind of bed it is. It's all about what part of speech they are modifying in the sentence.
And there's an extra tip about late and lately that clarifies two distinct meanings, despite their similar sound. They aren't the same at all, are they?
No, not at all. While late can be both an adjective and an adverb meaning not on time, lately is only an adverb and it has a completely different meaning.
Yeah.
Late as an adverb means arriving or happening after the planned or usual time. For instance, he arrived late for the meeting. But lately means recently or in the recent past. Refers to a period of time near the present.
Recently.
So I haven't seen him lately means I haven't seen him recently. It's a small change in form, but a significant shift in meaning, and confusing them is a common error. You wouldn't say, he arrived lately for the meeting. That sounds very strange.
Good distinction. Okay, we've built our foundational language blocks: nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. We've explored their individual roles and how they subtly change meaning, how they describe things. Now it's time to put all those pieces together. Finally, let's talk about sentence structure, arranging these elements logically to convey your message clearly and effectively. building the whole house, not just the bricks.
This is where everything converges, absolutely. And the good news is the foundation of most basic English sentences is surprisingly straightforward, following what we often call the SVO formula, subject plus verb plus object. Understanding this basic structure is a great starting point for constructing clear and coherent sentences. It provides a reliable blueprint for expressing complete thoughts.
So subject, verb, object.svo. Can you break down what each of those components is again and why SVO is so fundamental in English?
Certainly. Let's recap. The subject is who or what performs the action of the verb. It's the agent, the doer, usually a noun or pronoun. The verb is the action itself, or it describes a state of being, be, seem. It's the core activity or state. And the object is who or what receives the action of the verb. It's the recipient, again, usually a noun or pronoun. For example, our source gives us cat, subject drink, a verb, milk, object. Here, cats are doing the action of drinking, and milk is receiving that action.
SVO.
Another example, cows, subject, eat, verb, grass, object. This SVO pattern is incredibly common and dominant in English. It's a solid blueprint for building your sentences. Well, English has more complex sentence structures, of course. Mastering SVO is the essential first step because it forms the backbone of countless expressions. Without a clear subject and verb, you often don't have a complete thought, just a fragment.
Okay, building on SVO, let's look at the O part, the object, more closely. Because apparently, not all objects are created equal. We have direct and indirect objects, and distinguishing them can make your sentences even more precise, especially with verbs like give or send.
That's right. The first rule to remember, as the source points out, is that both direct and indirect objects must be nouns, noun phrases, or pronouns. They cannot be other parts of speech. When we talk about direct and indirect objects, we're usually dealing with what we call detransitive verbs. These are action verbs like give, send, buy, tell, show. They can take two objects, one direct and one indirect. They transfer the acts not just to one thing, but often from the subject to someone something via the direct object.
Okay, so what's a direct object again? How do we identify it?
A direct object is the noun or pronoun that receives the action of the verb directly. It answers the question what or whom asked after the verb. For example, in The Students Eat Lunch, if you ask what did the students eat, the answer is lunch. So lunch is the direct object, it's the thing being eaten. Another example, she wrote a letter. Ask, what did she write? Answer, a letter. A letter is the direct object.
And an indirect object, how does that differ from the direct one? What question does it answer?
An indirect object specifies to whom, or for what the action of the verb is performed. It's the beneficiary or recipient of the direct object. It often answers the question to whom or for whom. It's usually placed between the verb and the direct object in the SVIODO structure. Subject, verb, indirect object, direct object. Like, she gave him the book. Who did she give the book to? Him. Him is the IO, the book is the DO.
Okay, SVIODO.
Or the indirect object can also appear after the direct object, introduced by a preposition like to or for. The source's example is, Anwin gave the present to Laurie. If you ask, to whom did Anwin give the present? The answer is Laurie. So Laurie is the indirect object, appearing in a prepositional phrase here. Another example, he bought a gift for her. He bought a gift, DO, for whom? For her, IO, in a prepositional phrase.
And there's a crucial rule connecting these two types of objects. You can't have one without the other, or at least you can't have an indirect object without a direct one. Is that right?
Yes, and this is very important conceptually. Not all sentences need indirect objects, of course, but most sentences with transitive verbs, verbs that take an object, need a direct object. And here's the key rule. If there is no direct object in a sentence with these types of verbs, there cannot be an indirect object.
Why is that?
Because the indirect object is the recipient of the direct object. If there's nothing being given, sent, or told, no direct object, then there's no one to receive it. To illustrate this, if we take the example, Anwin gave the present to Laurie, and we remove the direct object, the present, we're left with Anwin gave to Laurie. That sentence makes no sense because it doesn't specify what Anwin gave.
Right, gave what?
Exactly. The direct object, the present, is essential for the indirect object, to Laurie, to have context and for the sentence to be complete. It's like you can't give something to someone unless there's an actual something being given. The direct object has to be there first.
Wow, what a deep dive. Seriously. We've tackled articles a versus and versus the, pronouns, personal, object, possessive, demonstrative, relative, the tricky nuances of verbs like go and be, tenses, stative verbs, auxiliaries, passive voice. Then the secret order of adjectives that native speakers just know, comparatives, possessives like its versus its, those ing versus id adjectives, And finally, the fundamental SVO structure of English sentences, plus direct and indirect objects. Phew, you've just gotten a real shortcut, hopefully, to understanding some of the most common grammar questions learners face, transforming abstract rules into actionable insights.
Absolutely. And the beauty of English grammar, despite its quirks and exceptions, and definitely has them, is its underlying logic, mostly. By understanding these foundational steps, these core concepts, you're not just memorizing rules blindly, you're building a mental framework. And that framework makes learning more efficient and speaking more natural. You start to feel how the language works. You're now better equipped, hopefully, to spot those common mistakes like confusing its and its, or gone and been, or using much versus many, and to choose the right words with more confidence. This framework allows you to approach new grammatical challenges with a clearer understanding of how English typically functions, leading to real breakthroughs in your fluency.
So, as you continue your English journey, maybe consider this. How might consciously applying just one of these rules today make a difference? Perhaps focusing on the A versus in sound rule when you speak, or really thinking about gone versus been when using the present perfect, or even just paying attention to adjective order when you describe something. How might that change the way you interact with English today? Every small victory in grammar, every little clarification builds not just fluency, but also immense confidence in your communication. It really does add up. For even more engaging English content and to continue your journey, you might want to check out the English with Lucy YouTube channel, which inspired much of today's deep dive with its clear explanations. Thank you so much for joining us on the deep dive. Keep exploring, keep learning, keep asking questions, and we'll catch you on the next one.